This episode of the R3 podcast contains references to suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation, which some listeners may find distressing. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the R3 podcast for Pride Month. Today's topic is LGBTQIA+ inclusion, how leaders can encourage people to bring their whole selves to work. And this is the first time that an R3 member has hosted the R3 podcast, so thanks to Ben Luxford for vacating the chair for this one. I'm Francesca Tackie, a licensed insolvency practitioner. I run my own insolvency practice, Mercury Corporate Recovery Solutions in Manchester. I'm also the chair of the board of trustees of a health equality charity, BHA for Equality, who specialise in addressing health and social care inequalities. I'm a former IPA Diversity and Inclusion Champion Award winner and a founding member of the R3-Insolvency Service Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Steering Group, and I'm absolutely delighted to have been asked to host this podcast today. Like with all podcasts, it's important to stress that while care has been taken in the preparation of this podcast, it's intended for general guidance only and does not constitute legal advice. Today, I'll be in conversation with two very interesting guests. We have Reese and her wife, Emma Cusdin, to share their expertise in LGBTQIA+ inclusion in the workplace. Rachel is the founder of Global Butterflies, an organisation through which she supported a number of large and small organisations by delivering trans-inclusive training, initiatives and coaching to senior-level decision-makers and HR teams. Rachel is a former vice chair of the Law Society Solicitors Division and was also added to the Inside Out Leaderboard as a senior leader who speaks openly about mental health in the workplace. She's been listed as an inspirational leader by the organisation D&I Leaders and was also listed as a Pride Inclusion Advocate by Pride Life Global. Emma Cusdin is a director of Global Butterflies alongside wife Rachel. Emma is a trained executive coach and a fellow of the Chartered Institute for Personnel Development, and she has over 30 years of experience in HR. She's also a proud champion and advocate of trans and non-binary rights, and she co-founded Transformation, the UK's largest professional networking organisation for trans and non-binary individuals. Emma has been awarded many accolades for her trans inclusion work, including winning the Positive LGBT Role Model Award, National Diversity Awards, and receiving the Prime Minister's Office Points of Light recognition for her tireless work in trans inclusion. Emma, Rachel, welcome both. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. We're honoured to be here. Thank you.
Happy Pride Month.
And happy Pride Month to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to kick off, can I ask you both, what does Pride Month mean to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, I came out in the 90s and really Pride used to be a real protest. Not many corporates, especially at the end of the 80s. It was more a protest campaigning for our rights through Section 28. And as time has gone on through my youth to me becoming a grown and mature adult, Pride has become more of a celebration. It's become more corporate. It's become more people celebrating. And now it's going back to a genesis of activism and campaigning again. A lot of corporates have actually fallen away from Pride. Now it's got a little harder. I'll be a little critical here. And we are seeing that actually you have to earn your brand to march in Pride now. If you can't just change your logo, if you haven't earned it, you can't be there. And a lot more young activism. With the world moving back on rights, I'm saying that sort of really Pride has become much more of a campaigning activism protest again all over the world.
Absolutely. Emma, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think here in the UK, what we've seen, which has been so beautiful, is the emergence of a lot more local pride.
Yes.
Even our local town has its pride. It's in its second year, and we're seeing those prides being less corporate, they're more family, they're more diverse, and I think for me, they're more inclusive. And it's about the celebration of you and seeing people like you also attending, finding your community, but also, as Rachel says, to protest.
Yeah.
That, rights don't always go forward. Sometimes they go backwards as well. So I think for me, just seeing the beauty of local prides is just amazing. And if you've never been as a listener, go. They're just awesome and brilliant.
Absolutely. And I think I couldn't agree more with that. And I think whilst it's disappointing that there is some rollback on some elements of Pride, I do think it's definitely encouraging to see many corporate businesses embrace Pride Month in a visible way, which I think is a positive thing for those of us in the LGBTQIA+ community.
Yeah. They must earn their attendance.
They must earn it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a bit then about your career journeys. First, if I can turn to you, Rachel. Now, I think it's fair to say you've had quite an interesting career path. Started as an engineer before you moved into law. Can you tell us a bit about that and how you ended up moving from engineering into law?
Yeah, so I was sponsored to university by GC Marconi. I worked there as a vacation student in 1983, my first job, £50 a week. For 40-hour week, that was. And I said I did my O levels and A levels and my degree, and GC sponsored me in software engineering. And I went to the University of Hertfordshire and did my software degree there. And then went back into defense during the Cold War, really interesting times, and worked kind of on submarine detection and tornado aircraft. And that was quite interesting. But I missed human beings because I was working in software bunkers and software, in all sorts of places. And I wanted to work with actual people. So I actually then moved into HR, human resources and training, to do recruitment for technical people. So I travel all over the country recruiting, running graduate schemes and apprenticeship schemes, commercial schemes. I did that for a while. And then the Berlin Wall came down and the defense market collapsed. We were making lots of people redundant. I got quite good at employment tribunal and got an interest in law. And so I then decided, my brother and sister are both lawyers, and I decided that, maybe law looks fun. I'm going to go. So I went back in sort of, my late 20s, early 30s to law school. My CPE and my legal practice course. I joined a firm, a small law firm in London, then joined the College of Law as an associate director in logistics and operations, because I still bringing my engineering background and my law together. So I joined the law school, the College of Law as it was, and I worked there for 15 years and was a board member for operations at the end before I left in 2015 to set up Global Butterflies. So that's my sort of walk through of law and engineering.
Wow, fantastic. And it's interesting. I wonder if any of our lawyer listeners would describe law as fun. I like that.
It can be. Depends what you go in. My view is you go into law, sometimes you think criminal law is really interesting or employment law, but in some areas it doesn't pay very well, and you end up sort of moving towards areas that can pay the mortgage. So you can't go into, you can't stay in the fun areas now these days. A lot of my friends who are barristers who work in criminal law, they don't get paid very much, and you end up sort of bumping into other areas that are a little bit more lucrative. But I think law is interesting, especially if you're in human rights right now. I think that can be a challenge, but also very rewarding.
I think that's really interesting, Rachel. Thanks for taking us through that. And Emma, if I can turn to you then. So you've had quite a different career path, I think, to Rachel. You're an expert in HR matters and also a passionate LGBTQIA plus advocate. Can you take us through your career journey?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's far less interesting than Rachel's. I would say.
That's not true.
So I left university. I decided that actually what I wanted to do is human resources. It was part of my university degree, and effectively worked for 30 years in various organizations, typically financial services and the large, complicated ones, working my way through different HR scenarios. And for me, this was always about creating environments where people can thrive and do their best work. There were some challenging times. There were some difficult times. I ended up working stuff that was always more challenging and difficult and pushing myself a bit harder. I lived out of the UK for a couple of years. I went to live in Switzerland for a couple of years, dispatched to Greece for 18 months to help a business in Greece.
Wow.
Working across the world. I think I've been in employment tribunal in 5 European countries in my career.
Massive.
So
I don't know if that's something to boast about.
I don't think it is. But hey, I think for me, it was all about people, leadership, and creating those environments where people can just absolutely thrive. And I decided after 30 years of doing that in various organizations that I would step out and join my amazing wife in Global Butterflies. And I think I'm in my 4th year of doing that. I'm really enjoying just working with so many different businesses, the big ones, the small ones, the international ones, the UK ones, and just helping people on that journey.
No, I think that's quite the career journey there, and, working globally as well, which I think is something to be proud of. So here you are, as a formidable couple with lots in common, clearly. I wanted to ask how you met each other.
Oh, I didn't expect that question.
Rachel does this better than I do.
Well, Emma was my competitor in 2015 when I set up Global Butterflies in 2015. I only worked in law firms. That was Global Butterflies came out of law. It was only supported law firms when it first started. And we have 60 law firms in our portfolio now. And Emma's organization Transformation, which was a networking organization, did training as well. And she was doing law as well. And every other type of organization. And I was like, oh, that Emma Cusdin, what a terrible organization, stealing my work. And it came to one day she sort of liked to tweet on Twitter when it used to be fun. And I thought, how dare she like that tweet of mine? You build up these weird things in your head. So I then wrote to her and said, would you like to come to lunch? And let's do a sort of, really nice to meet you and find out, the work that you're doing. And she was really nice. It was a real surprise, and we talked about the work and we talked about doing joint work. And then we sort of said, well, let's meet up for dinner soon. And then sort of 3 months later, she was in Paris on business. So when she came back, we met and we went to the National Gallery Cafe for dinner and a bottle of champagne.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. We started dating from then. We got engaged in Toronto at the top of the CN Tower, having dinner when we were working with clients in Toronto.
Wow.
And then we got married in Kent in 2021 after the lockdowns finished. Yeah. So she closed Transformation and joined Global Butterflies, which is how you take your competition out. You marry them.
There was a plan there, wasn't there?
It's a once only deal.
Yeah, I won't marry anybody else to take them out competition.
That's a very interesting tactic, isn't it, for a competitor? Okay, well, that's a really lovely story. Great to hear, and thank you very much for sharing that with us. Rachel, if I could ask you about your own experience in the very different workplace environments that you've worked in, between the engineering sector and the law profession, and what was that like for you in terms of the difference between the two?
I mean, part of my journey as being a trans woman was in engineering in the 80s and 90s. I didn't see any, there were gay members of staff in the defense sector. I mean, they weren't out really either, but they were there. But there weren't any visible trans people. And then towards my end of my time at GC, which was sort of mid-90s, somebody did transition at my organization. And I remember thinking, wow, you're brave. And I was very jealous. That was a time when people weren't coming out in those big corporates like that. So one of the reasons I actually moved into law was I thought law would be a bit more in the back of my head, knowing that I wanted to transition too. I thought law would be a bit more accepting. And then working in practice in London, and then decided that it probably wasn't going to be. Again, no visibility that I could see at the time in sort of late 90s. I mean, I always say in my training, not many rainbow flags outside law firms in the 90s. Then what I ended up doing was that the reason I joined the College of Law was because as being a student there, doing my solicitor's exams, was that I'd seen a lot of gay and lesbian staff on the staff at the College of Law. And I thought, that could be a good place to transition. So I applied there as an associate director in male mode, got the job. And then once I was in and established, I kind of said, hello, I'd like to transition here, please. And, this was a long time ago. It was in the 90s, and they were really good. They came down to a bit of communication, project management, except in there were 850 staff at the College of Law then. I don't think any of them had met a trans person before. So there was a lot of education for people. But my first day back, there were flowers on my desk. People were really good. He invited me to everything. I was front and center. He really demonstrated his support. And you know what? I then, for 15 years, never spoke about being trans again. I mean, the only reason I have to do that now is because, obviously, the rollback of rights in the UK. Back then, I never spoke about trans for 15 years. I just got on with my job. And this was the thing about being authentic in the workplace. For the first time in my life, remembering I'd had these many careers, I stuck at this career for 15 years. And I rose up from a junior director to an associate to a full board member in 15 years in an 8-site university, a £80 million business. Because I didn't have to worry about who I was. I didn't have to worry about the noise in my head and covering who I was. I could just be me and go in and do the job. And I thrived. And so for me, law was a really good move. I found that the subject, but it was more accepting. And being obviously in an educational establishment like the University of Law was a wonderful place to work.
I mean, I think that's a really positive story, isn't it? Because it must have been quite a difficult time for you not being able to feel like you could be your authentic self at work. Yeah. But what would you say specifically sort of made you feel more comfortable starting to be the real you? How did you feel sort of before and after you transitioned?
I think before you spend an awful lot of energy hiding who you are. So my life before transition was, I was out to some of my friends and not my family, but my friends in London, having two lives. I lived on I was on the club scene in London. That's exhausting if you're going out 4 nights a week. And so you have two identities. Your face to work and some of your friends. Not being your authentic self it's just so tiring and all consuming. And how can you perform well at work when you're not who you are? You can't talk about what you did at the weekend or who your friends are or your authentic self. I mean, the reason I transitioned was because you get to a dark place, and a lot of trans people get to that kind of dark thoughts of, ending your life kind of thought. And that was becoming very my mind a lot. And then all I often say is that you do the deal with the devil. Well, look, you know what? If I'm thinking about ending my life, maybe I should just transition and maybe it'll be okay. And if it doesn't work, then I'll end my life. And it was that kind of that deal with the devil that you do. Yeah. And I transitioned, and all those demons you have in your head about transition being bad, actually, that was not what happened. It was wonderful. My family were great. My friends were great. My workplace was wonderful. And suddenly it was just such a huge lead weight off my shoulders that I, could just get on with my job and go out with my friends, and my two worlds came together. And, you then have all the energy to throw into your career, your friendship and relationships, and not have to worry about that. So before and after, the dark times and the light, it really is that.
I think I can definitely relate to that, certainly in terms of that mental load of having to edit yourself in the workplace as a gay woman. And I think that certainly influenced my decision to set up my own insolvency practice so I could create my own culture. And it's just one less thing that you need to worry about. But it's still always a issue, isn't it, I'm sure for many people, in terms of that fatigue that you get from trying hard to sort of conceal yourself for the benefit of other people. So, I can definitely relate to some of that. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the conditions in the workplace that might help to foster a more inclusive space and environment for people to be in. I mean, I think fundamentally that people, they do want to be nice to each other. They do want to be liked and respected and to enjoy being at work. But I think we need to be honest that there can be mixed reactions towards EDI initiatives, which feel particularly in the spotlight at the moment due to the current political climate, the recent court ruling as well, which affects trans people. So I just wanted to ask you both. So what do executives and leaders say when you're out there delivering corporate EDI training in terms of the challenges and the barriers that they face when they're implementing or trying to implement EDI initiatives?
That's a really great question. So I think for me, it starts with them as individuals. How do they feel about their own lived experience? How empathetic are they? How open are they to other people's experiences on this amazing journey of life? We all have our own view of how we experience life. Some executives are really good at understanding that other people's lives are very different to them. Some executives are not. So it starts always with the individual. How are they feeling about stepping into conversations that are outside their experience? And we've got some top tips about how they do that, but it does start with the individual. The other thing is the values and culture of the organization. So what's the environment they're in terms of what have the most senior leaders said about this? What is the tone? What is the conversation within an organization? Obviously, in smaller businesses, the senior leaders have a massive impact. In larger businesses, yes, the top board do, but it also comes into sort of the immediate line manager. What does the immediate line manager feel about this? What are they willing to say? What are they not willing to say about that? I think for me, where we've seen success is people think about intersectional identities. We bring all of us into the workplace. We don't just bring one element of us into the workplace. And we talk about being authentic. I'm equally, as Rachel will know, I'm a little bit neurodiverse and a bit focused sometimes. I sometimes have good mental health days and not. So if we can weave those in as well and start to include people in all walks of life, I think for me, that's the important. Sometimes we start with diversity, but actually we should start with inclusion and think about the intersectionalities. And that helps us stepping into some of those difficult conversations. I also think giving just time and space with humanity and kindness to step into those conversations, I think is really, really important. Often we hear about humanity and kindness in workplaces being sort of weak and soft, but actually it's really positive. Be a really positive thing. It can also be quite a strong thing. So for me, if we understand that people come into work Most people come into work to do great jobs. So for me, how do we step into that and have those safe space conversations with curiosity, with empathy, with people who may have very different lived experiences to us? So, if you want to come in and assault somebody, then typically organizations have rules about, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But by and large, organizations, I think, especially in EDI topics, are all on their journey. They all want to learn. And that comes at the top of leaders, but equally being willing to step into that and creating that psychological safety.
Absolutely. So there's a theme there, isn't there, of that top-down leadership, that distinction as well between the small and large organisations as well, I think, which is quite important. And we'll talk a bit more later on about how we might overcome some of these barriers. Emma, just some advice from a HR perspective, if you can put your HR hat on.
She's always got her HR hat on.
Weld it on. It's hard to take off.
Even if an organisation doesn't have a collective will or a desire or an intention to implement EDI policies, there are legal duties, aren't there, that an employer has in terms of protecting its employees from discrimination. So whilst it's distinct from EDI policy, there is a level of intersectionality, isn't there, between EDI policy initiatives and employers' legal duties, aren't there?
There are, yes. I think for me, employers knowing their legal duties, whether that's through the Equality Act, whether that's through gender pay gap reporting requirements, whether that's through regulatory requirements they may have if they're a regulated business, knowing your legal duties, knowing the Health and Safety at Work Acts, for example, that cover both physical and mental health. However, most organizations are thinking, how do we go further than that? I think for leaders and managers, knowing that there are base legislative requirements and obligations and duties on them is the most important thing. But equally, if we can step beyond that and create a more inclusive workplace, then I think that is a better thing for attract people in, how you retain them, how they do the best work they possibly can do.
Yeah.
But yes, we often start with, we need to understand the law. But actually, for me, I think a lot of people, it starts with human beings and their values and what matters to them and what sort of leader do you want to be.
Exactly. And just on that then, so what advice could you give to both small and large firms in the insolvency and restructuring industry about the importance of being more LGBTQIA plus inclusive, whether that's for their employees or for their clients?
Well, I think the fact is that large organizations, it's a little easier. They have big legal departments. They understand their regulatory. They normally have a large HR function, which has DEI in it or as a separate function. So they know the benefits of a diverse and included workforce. The bottom line is always better in those organizations. The R&D is better in those organizations. The happiness of the overall workforce is always happier and better. I mean, I always say, if you're nice to the trans people, you're nice to everybody in your organization. It's always, I think the large organizations that we work with, the global ones, get this. I mean, in some jurisdictions, they're rebadging. They've got rid of the D&I function, but they're still doing D&I. They're just not calling it that because CEOs are not stupid. They want that client. I mean, that we've talked about that 28% of Generation Z are LGBTQI. That's your next workforce. That's your next client base. You can't lose those. We've seen that in America with companies abandoning DEI. There's been a boycott of two of the brands that have done that publicly. Their profits have fallen. And the one brand in the same area, I'm not going to name the brands, in the same area, their profits have rocketed because people go, okay, you're not doing DEI. I'm going to go shop over there. It's brand choice. And so the large organizations, it's really, really straightforward and they get it. I think the challenges with the smaller organizations is that they are smaller. They just want to do the job, right? We're a small organization. We're so busy to sit down and think about DEI or the benefits of it in an organization less than 100 people. I mean, you're trying to get the orders out. You're trying to pay the tax. So it's a lot harder to look at those benefits. Yeah. And secondly, in this area, the information sources for small companies is quite reduced. It is certainly pushback of worldwide DEI. What you're seeing is a lot of information that they're reading is not coming from a very good place, especially on trans rights. So there are a lot of articles getting written by people with ulterior motives. And that in magazines you think would be okay. So you would see the person who's in charge of HR on a small company would have to read a magazine and you'll see an article in there that isn't particularly helpful. And AI, if you start Googling DEI and AI or advice, well, AI scrapes up all the information from the world and puts that out. Well, that information is very biased and very anti-LGBTQI. So you're working in HR, you tap in, how do I do this? And it comes up with all these articles and suggestions that are a little bit biased against the very topic you're trying to implement. And so our advice for small companies is you need to find sources that you trust, multiple sources, critical thinking. Why is the person writing like this? Where are the sources? And you try to find and subscribe to organizations that can support you. There are lots of LGBTQI organizations out there that are small, that help small businesses. They're kind of like your plug-in DEI that you subscribe to. And I would advise small, if you can afford to do that, is to subscribe to these small organizations that can do your inclusion and diversity for you. They're just not in your company, but they'll help you do that. And you get the benefits of a diverse and included workforce, not just an LGBTQI, to provide you support on everything, but they're not in your company and you're not paying a salary. You've just got these companies to come and do it for you. So that's where I would say, but if you're even so small that you can't afford one of those smaller companies to help you, then you need to look critically at data sets that you are receiving, because they are extreme and they are many. And some of our small companies, where they're getting very bad information.
Yeah, and I think that's really helpful, actually. And it's certainly something that we've seen on the R3-Insolvency Service Steering Group, is that the differences between the resource available for larger firms versus smaller firms, that's exactly what we see, is that large firms are well set up, whereas it's a much bigger challenge. I'm a small business owner myself. It's difficult. You wear so many hats all the time.
Thank you. One thing I would say is actually, if you are a small firm, you can, and we're seeing this a little bit more, is small firms contacting larger firms for mentoring support. So small company contacting a DEI department of a large corporate saying, hi, we're small, but we're loosely connected to your sector or whatever. Would you take a meeting with us? And most of the DEIs and the corporates that we work with would just be happy to give some time to mentor a smaller organization. We're seeing a lot more of that small to large business connection.
Okay, I think that's, again, another really useful tip there, because as insolvency professionals, we're out, we network a lot. There's lots of events. So, that's something certainly I think that small businesses can tap into. So I think that's a really good idea. Thanks, Rachel. So as insolvency practitioners, we are professionals. We're governed by the Insolvency Code of Ethics around professional behaviour. We're service providers. We've got that duty to be respectful of everyone, whether that's our employees, our clients, our work referrals. But Rachel, what would you say to someone who might be wrestling with a decision whether or not to come out at work through fear of negative perceptions or even internalised homophobia? What do you think?
Actually, I'm going to give that one to Emma.
Okay.
I think for me, it's around knowing where you are on that journey, knowing what feels right, looking for the signals and signs internally in the organization. Have they said anything? Has anybody said anything? Is there somebody you work with that may have a family member that's LGBT that you think is positive? Do you see on social media them putting pronouns on their LinkedIn pages? What signals and signs are you seeing that somebody in your organization is going to be okay? And that might be a leader, it might be the owner in a small organization, it may be something that you overhear when you're getting your cup of coffee by the coffee machine. Is there some positivity in the organization that you think, actually, I could just have a chat to somebody? Because I think for me, those are the things that really, really help people in stepping forward. So, we're now in Pride season. Know that there are some things that inclusive businesses can put on sort of for more retail, put on shop doorways. Organizations can equally think about how they write a LinkedIn post or how they send internal communications. So what am I seeing? Am I going to be okay here by sharing myself? And that can be a long journey. I think the coming out experience is always when you're ready. And all the positivity that comes with that, but all the things that we hold in our heads sometimes that stop us living authentically as a self. And I think for me, that's the biggest part of the journey. Are you ready? And supported in the organization. And it can be big things, it can be small things.
And I just would say that, most people, especially trans and non-binary people that come out in an organization, it generally, in our experience, goes really well. Mm-hmm. The thing that they always say afterwards is, I wish I hadn't waited so long. Because the demons you build up in your head do slow you down and you do put it off, but it usually goes well. Mm-hmm. And then why didn't I do this 5 years ago? And it's always the thing we hear. So that's another piece really. Don't wait. If you can, you should.
Really sound advice from you both. Thank you very much. I think A key factor, surely then, is being able to have what can feel at times difficult discussions around LGBTQIA plus inclusion. How would you suggest that people go about having conversations, asking questions they might want to ask in a sensitive way at work?
Well, I think this is
definitely your wheelhouse.
I think for me, think about why you're asking the questions. What are you trying to find out? If you want to ask personal questions, always ask that question. Is it okay to ask you a personal question? And if the answer is no, then please do stop. Don't be like the alien that's just landed on planet Earth and keep going. Some people do. I find the right time. If the answer is yes, you can ask me personal questions. Think about the question you're about to ask and think, how would you feel about it if you asked yourself that question? Some people, it becomes just curiosity. Some people, it's about learning. Some people, it's about salaciousness. So just be careful about how you ask the questions and find the environment. And if you sense that person is becoming uncomfortable with your questions, then use your empathy, use your brain and stop. So for me, you can literally ask anything about, but also knowing about your relationship with the individual. If they're a close friend, the chances are you can probably ask more questions. If there's somebody you've just met, there's still somebody you've just met. So, you haven't really got a relationship or friendship with them. And I think for me, this is challenging this space. Some people are very comfortable, some people are not. And equally, as you're having that conversation about your reflected learnings, think about, how is this taking you forward on your journey of allyship? As Rachel often says, I give people lots of questions when I'm really interested in a subject. And for me, it's about me learning. I want to learn more about an experience that's not my experience. And sometimes I have to stop because I can sense that person's getting increasingly uncomfortable. I think doing it in person is always better.
Yeah.
It's the body language
You
as
miss
well.
the body language. And for me, it's also about thinking about the or commonality that you find. Because we're all on this journey of life. We have a lot of things that are in common that may have different contexts about some of the challenges that we face. And sort of empathizing and understanding that equally can be a challenge in different elements of the EDI conversation, I think are really, really important as well. But knowing that a journey, if you want to be an ally, it can be long. It can be a load on your own mental health if you're suddenly talking about some of the issues that we've been talking about here, which is about suicidation and suicide feelings. For some people, that can be really triggering and really tough. So ultimately, look after your mental health around that.
I think if it's family, just on family members, if it's like an older family member, get your younger family members to do it, get your grandkids or whatever, your children to talk to your grandparents or something. There's a generational difficulty talking about this subject. I find hobbies really good as well. I mean, I'm still an engineer and I like tinkering with old cars. And there's a lot of women in car clubs that I've been in, but there's a lot of guys there and they hadn't met a trans woman before who drove up I did up an old Range Rover once 20 years ago and I went to the events and these big guys driving their big old 4-litre Range Rovers, they had never met a trans woman and it was a bit unusual. They were a bit shy. And then it was about the car and about the work and the engineering and the stuff that we'd all done. And those barriers melted away.
Definitely. And you've touched on that now with families and hearing you talk, Emma, as well about that support and looking after your mental health. Is it different for someone in terms of trying to have these conversations with family members as well? Because as you've alluded to there, strangers have different conversations to people who are closer. So maybe those conversations are more difficult with families. Do you have any sort of tips or other suggestions for having those conversations with people who are quite close to you on the family side?
They are some of the most difficult conversations. They can be also the best, but they can also be the most difficult. And I think to some parents of LGBT people, maybe outside their experience, and our view is always think about your child, think about loving them unconditionally and don't judge. But for some people, that can be really difficult. And we appreciate that. Equally for the person coming out to those family conversations, we know it can be very sensitive time. And there's a lot of emotions are coming out and a lot of emotions about people living authentically. There's also sometimes a little bit of perfectionism, be perfect straight away. Otherwise, they don't love me at all. And I think for me, a lot of this, as Rachel said, is what people hold in their heads. So again, coming back to what we talked about earlier, which is about compassion and kindness and helping people and understanding what you want to do. For me, having my family with me on my journey was really important. And I was willing to absolutely help them on that journey. I was willing to work at their pace for them. And ultimately, they got there. My dad's now 90.
Wow.
Very occasionally, he'll still use my old name, my dead name. And all I have to do is now look at him and he apologizes straight away. And those instances are getting fewer and fewer and fewer. And for me, do I get my placard out and hit him over the head? No, I don't. We support him with love and kindness because, he has just been awesome and amazing. But we know we might think we're perfect, but we're not. We do make mistakes. And for me, it's about thinking about the overall support that you get. Don't think of it as if this is a one-hit conversation. It may take many conversations with support and love and kindness to get people where you would like them to be.
No, you can be quite impatient because you've known all your life you're trans or you're gay or lesbian. And when you tell your family member, you're expecting them to catch up really quickly. And, when I told my mum, she was like, oh my God, is it something I did? What are the neighbors going to think? And then they go to the, oh my goodness, what's your life going to be like now? And they worry about you and your life and they get there. So as Emma says, it's a long street of conversations. I mean, when Emma came out to her dad, took him a while and then he got there. And then when we got married, we had 100 LGBT people in our wedding and Emma's dad did a speech in front of them and they loved him. Yeah. He was brilliant. It just takes that time and patience.
Yeah, it takes time. And I think that's really interesting to hear what you've got to say there because it is a two-way street. And exactly what you've just said there, Rachel, that, it's taken you all this time to build up to this. You can't just expect the people around you to absorb it all the time immediately and in the way that you expect them to because we're all human. Yeah. And just exercise patience and tolerance. I like that. Okay, I think that's been really helpful. And I just wondered whether, finally, before we finish, there's any sort of resources that you think that people can read up on to help them grow their understanding in this area.
The things that we kind of look at, different sources for different things across the LGBTQI community. So we really like the resources of the HRC in the US. It's a US resource, but we like that. For younger people, we really like the Trevor Project stuff. For businesses in the UK, the Out Britain is really good. The Federation of Small Businesses has an LGBT section we kind of like. As I mentioned, you can contact the DEI of a larger organization. They may be very happy to help you mentor. There's also membership, lots of cheap training and membership bodies that you can go to, like D&I Leaders do lots of conferences you can subscribe to. Proud HR, which is a small group in London, but for HR professionals. Interlaw do a lot of events that they Zoom if you're in the legal profession. There's the Pride in Leadership group,
which are Manchester-based.
Manchester-based. Link LGBT, which is insurance-based. So lots of groups out there that are linked. There's obviously Stonewall as well, if you want a bit more campaigning. So we started lots of small, I would say there's not some one big old, there are organizations. When I was talking about the in-house, people like Inclusive Employers, which are those small plug-in groups that will help and come do your DEI for you. But you'd have to be a little bit bigger to subscribe to those services. What I would say is don't use AI to advise your organization. It's scraping up from the world and it's not very inclusive at the moment. So it's scraping up that sort of data that just might give you the slightly wrong. But otherwise, there are those very good resources that we sometimes use and have worked alongside in some cases.
Well, I think there's a plethora of resources there. Thank you for that. And the message there clearly is to use credible sources where you can and treat AI with caution at the moment as it's in infancy.
And any magazines, just who's writing that article, especially generally the world is going forward inclusively. Yeah. If you see an article that says, well, trans people, you may should use trans people, shouldn't use lose, or whatever, if you're still looking at articles that are sort of sounding like they're reasonable, but are telling you something that's not inclusive, look at the writer, go to LinkedIn and look at who they're connected to, the groups they belong to, just to see where that view is. Because rights generally move forward, even in this environment. If somebody's saying you should be taking rights away or you should be cautious about rights, I would then look at the source of the writer just to critically think what the data that you're receiving.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rachel, Emma, for joining me. And thanks for giving us some really great insights there into how firms can be more LGBTQIA plus inclusive.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to listen to past episodes of the R3 podcast, you can do so on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, or in R3's technical library at www.r3.org.uk. Thanks for listening.